morning. Welcome to FSA Papers Training. My name is Britt Mosley. I'll be your tour guide for the day. A little bit about myself. I have been a literacy coach for 2 years at Northeast High School and Pinellas Park High School. This year I'm switching to a personalized learning staff developer and working on a special project called Beyond the Classroom. I'm going to be developing curriculum resources. Welcome. So I've been spending all summer deep diving into the standards and creating these great lessons that are going to be all digital and available for use for everybody. So the purpose of the lesson was to help teachers learn how to support their kids in passing the FSA writing test or performing well on the FSA writing test. What we did is Jennifer and I had talked a lot about the issues that teachers talked about having in their classrooms with kids, not really knowing how to teach them how to write a great intro, not really understanding what really needed to be in a conclusion or how to make a great conclusion, and then eventually really we've had a real focus this year on elaboration. So I wanted to prepare something that would allow us to look at excellent samples to either learn from and fix or ones that are well done and show teachers how to analyze those with their kids so that they can see in front of them the workings of a good paper or the places where a paper can be improved. The writing standards are kind of enormous, and what I did here is I took basically the whole writing standard for informational text. And then I took just the numbers or the letter choices that are part of the standard. If you look at the writing standard, you'll see it has lots of subpoints. So I took just the letter choices that are going to go with our training today. We're going to be looking at and talking about introductions, particularly in student work in the FSA papers. We're going to be looking at development, which happens in your elaborative or your body paragraphs. And then finally, we're going to be looking at conclusions in the FSA paper samplers. So the next thing I want to do is show you basically the targets, and we're just going to run through it really quickly because we don't need to spend a lot of time. When you build a scale, or when I built a scale, and you have this to take home with you, and I've added words in, you want to provide vocabulary that the students will need to know from the standard in order to, and there's two reasons that you do that. One is because these are the same words that show up in the rubrics, and these are the same words that show up in the prompts when they're asked about, when they're asked to write. So you want to always cover the vocabulary of the standard, and then eventually you would cover vocabulary in something that you're reading, maybe vocabulary from the text set if you felt your kids needed that work, and that would be in addition to these kinds of words. So you can see the words that I put down were like accurate, effective, organization, elaboration, evidence, and then I added some other words, sufficient, adequate, and satisfactory. And I always leave boxes whenever I create a scale so that we can add words that I may not have anticipated that the students need support with. So I always just provide boxes. And then you can see that in a scale you move from lower cognitive complexity up to the complexity of the standard. Anything in your 2 has to be below the verbiage of the standard, and anything above the 3 has to be complexity level higher. So one of the challenges with a writing standard is typically the kids are writing, so that's a pretty complex task. When they have to synthesize, you're kind of at the top of the difficulty. So when you create an activity for kids that can already do this, to continue to try to master or get better at this particular skill, you have to usually move to words like evaluate, because in writing you're already creating, right? You're synthesizing an essay, so you've hit create. So the most they can do now is look at somebody else's work and say, this did it well or didn't do it well, and this is how it could be corrected. So start to think of, with writing, what's complexity level higher would be like peer reviewing, or like what we do, grading as teachers. And the complexity lower might be just identifying those things in model texts. And so that's what you're going to see we're mostly doing in the scale. And I've updated this scale, but we're mostly just, I know not to include evidence in the text, things that are lower than the standard, and then finally creating. When they're actually writing the essay, they'd be creating. The rubric has 4 score points. It has 3 sections, writing, or grammar, focus, purpose, organization, and then evidence and elaboration. And I put it all on one paper. So when we go ahead and look at this, keep this in mind while we do this next activity. The next thing we're going to do is talk about some of the standard language. And we're going to be looking specifically at breakfast to do that. And this is a way that I would absolutely work on teaching this language to students in my classroom. So go ahead and take a minute with somebody near you and talk about what's going on with this breakfast. How would you describe this breakfast? And this is a good to do. Please talk with people around you. Think about it. Jot things down. What words did you use to describe this breakfast? Come on this side again. Coffee. So if we were going to take that away from specifically what you're seeing and kind of pull it out into a more general term, you'd say you have, you use the word the elements I need to get through the day. So it has the stuff I need. And then, is there a lot of variety in this?
No.
But you also said that it has the basics. And then we talked about those. What are the basics that are included in this breakfast? Coffee, right? We've got our caffeine source. What else?
Calcium.
Protein, good. Calcium.
Carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates. So it has all the, and probably in the milk there's some fat too. So it's got like all the nutrients that you absolutely need in a day. Anything else? Did you hear any other interesting words or interesting conversation? What?
Boring.
Boring.
Missing fruit.
Yeah, I know. I want fruit too. There's like not even a lot of color, right? Another thing I heard was I wouldn't serve this to company.
Right.
This might be what I would grab on my way out the door, but I wouldn't serve this to company. Can you think of a version of breakfast that might even be less than this? Probably a lot of us are consuming it right now as breakfast.
Just coffee.
Yeah, just coffee. So you could have, and I just want to make sure we're not going to freeze, you could actually have a breakfast that's less than this. Mm-hmm. So the goal of this, I guess, let me go ahead and move this, and we'll look at the other breakfast. Now talk for a moment with your neighbor about what this means, what kind of breakfast you think this is. Okay, what are you seeing? Okay, variety, color. Textures, yeah, a lot of textures of too much food, but can we ever really have, I mean, I'll take it home. I don't think there's, for me, I love food, there's never too much. But it's kind of cool, like there is a chocolate covered strawberry and there's like whipped cream. Even if I were to make what I would consider like a full breakfast at home, I don't think I'd be putting whipped cream on it. Like this is definitely a fancy. This breakfast, what do you notice about this breakfast? It's excessive. Nice, okay. But when you say excessive, like in a bad way or in a good way?
Kind of in a bad way, like a chocolate-covered strawberry at breakfast, that just seems a bit too much.
Oh.
That was my favorite part.
I know, it's like brunch, right? This feels like brunch. This is like, I went somewhere fancy and I'm getting something special. So that's what, when I see that, and I was noticing the same thing with like, it's a waffle, but it's got fruit and whipped cream, right? So what else though?
Well, this would, thinking on the diet that I've been on, this would serve 4 people.
Yes.
You know,
So there's a
it's
lot
not
of it.
going
There's a
on
lot.
there. You know, in another country that would serve a family of 4.
Yes, it would. So how about, you know how we went through like all the elements of it? Does it have the needed elements? Does it have protein?
Yeah.
Does it have essential fatty fats? Okay, does it have carbohydrates?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see that there's still coffee in the picture? Can you see there's a mimosa in the picture? Ah, there's a mimosa. You can see the stem. Like, we're going to guess that. One of these is a mimosa and the other is a glass of water. I'm just sure. So it's got so much more. Now, I'm going to carry you to the question with your partner. Which one do you think is more satisfying of the 2 breakfasts that we looked at and the third that we talked about but didn't look at? So of the ones, which one would fit the qualification of being more satisfying?
The second one.
The second one? Yeah, even if it is indeed a little excessive, it's still more satisfying.
It's what I would love to have.
Okay, yes, me too. Right now, let's pause now. Okay, so what characteristics, if we had to chunk it down into characteristics, what characteristics made it more satisfying?
Variety.
Variety, good. There was more. There was a little something that might have made it excessive, but we could say a little something special. What else did it have, which you talked about with the other breakfast, that it still has?
Oh, it has all basic elements still.
Yeah, all the basic elements that you need. So what I want you to do is think about those words, and can we apply those to writing? To have an essay that's satisfying according to your rubric, because that's the word they use. Go ahead and look at the rubric. They never define for the children what is satisfying. They simply throw a rubric at them that says satisfying. So to have a breakfast that's satisfying, you would say it has to have more writing. It needs to be longer. It has to have all the necessary basic elements in it. It must have that. It probably should have a little pop of a little something special. We call that writer's voice. Maybe a great anecdote, the things they add to it that just makes you go, oh yes, I want that breakfast. So those same terms that we use when we're talking about breakfast, we can use when we talk about rubrics. An adequate breakfast, which is the other one, right? If I go back to it, has just the basics. And we would have said there's not enough. Maybe it'll get you to lunch, but it's just got the basics in it. There's nothing special to it. And then an inadequate essay or an inadequate breakfast is only coffee or a cereal bar or something that doesn't even have all the basics. So this is a way that I would teach my students the language of the rubric and let them visualize very quickly how do we know when we look at an essay that it's satisfying, that it's adequate, or that it's inadequate. And I would do it with food, because we all like food, right? It works for everybody. Okay, now we're moving on. So go ahead and let's look at the rubric for a minute, and I'm going to flip back. And I want you to go ahead and underline some of those words. So when we talk about focus, purpose, and organization, you can see the language of the rubric. It says the essay is fully sustained. When we're at a 4, it's fully sustained and it has a clear controlling idea. When we get to a score point 3, it says that it is adequately sustained. And then when you get down to a score point 2, it'll say, and it's
Somewhat.
yeah, somewhat sustained. See how in every case there has to be a controlling idea, but here it's just a controlling idea. Here it's a clear controlling idea, and then it becomes a clear controlling idea in the score point 4 as well. The difference is how well that clear controlling idea is sustained. That's how we move through this. You're going to go ahead and take a minute to do the same thing with evidence and elaboration. Look at the 4 different boxes. That's why I've put them together this way. And highlight what you think the most important words are in evidence and elaboration, and see where they change and how they change between the score points and the rubric. And then finally, the last one, when we get to the grammar, you can only get 2 points, as you already know, and basically you can't make any patterns of errors in grammar, mechanics, punctuation if you're going to earn both of those points. So go ahead and quietly highlight for a moment, and then we will chat about it. Yes?
The FSA used to be graded at 6 points. When did it switch to 4 points?
It's actually the whole essay is graded out of 4, 4 is 8, 9, 10. Total of 10 raw score points. And those get magically, and none of us really know exactly how, but they get turned into a percentage score and added into the reading score for students. And we don't ever really know what the percentage score is. In my own experience as a teacher and as a literacy coach, I found that if students had to score typically at least earn, I felt like 5 of the raw score points and do well in the reading portion, to be able to pass FSA as a whole. That if I looked at their essays, and you guys have looked at your data, if you look at a student's writing score in focus, if they got much below a 4, they seem to not pass, which gave me the indication that it carries pretty heavy weight. I'd say, upwards of 30% the essay itself carries. So it's always been 4, 4, and 2. What you're probably referring to is the idea that, and we can't say that it's a passing paper because again, the way they pass FSA is a combination of 2 totally separate things, and you can pass FSA without earning what we call a proficient score in writing, and the proficient score in writing is a 3, 3, and a 2. But it has to be a 3, 3, and a 2, not just the 8 points. So if you got 4, 2, and 2, then you were great in one section, focus, purpose, and organization maybe, but your evidence and elaboration was weak. So you don't have what you would call a proficient paper. So you have to have a 3 in each of the categories and then a 2 in the writing one.
And is it required to graduate high school to pass the FSA?
Yes, and I want to say that with a caveat. Yes, except at this point, students, once they hit their junior year, can go into reading classes, and they're able to get concordant scores, just like they can for math, with an ACT or an SAT. And math, I guess it's other things, like I think the PERT, and things change, and the points you have to get on each of those tests changes periodically. So the short correct answer is yes, they have to pass a major test to graduate, and it's preferred that it's the FSA. But there are other options as we get close to graduation. Is that a sufficient answer? You guys all agree with that? All right, so go ahead and tell me what words you noticed as you looked at the second column, evidence and elaboration. Where did the rubric change? What did you notice about the rubric? Anyone?
The way it defines how much support.
Okay, and how does it do that? What are some of the
Goes
words?
from thorough and convincing to adequate to cursory to minimal.
Okay, so when we talk, those same kind of words we use to describe breakfast. And so then we have to, if we're really going to teach kids how to do well with this, we have to show them samples. And that's what the Fsa samplers are. There's only one set out there. There aren't a bunch of different ones. Hopefully they'll release a new set before we know it. But at this point, there is a 9th grade version and a 10th grade version that you can look at with your kids. And I would encourage you to look at both, no matter what grade you're teaching. Maybe if you're teaching 9th grade, chat with the 10th grade teachers at your school and make sure that they're not looking at them. But we all know kids need repetition, and it doesn't hurt them, and they won't necessarily remember from year to year. Oh, I totally remember going over this. They don't remember that as well. So I would say take every opportunity that you can. Another resource that I've provided for you that we may or may not look at today is Right Score essays. I gave you a couple documents. One is a kind of a sampler essay written by a student that's annotated. And then I gave you another document on kind of a teal paper that is essay, the scores and student samples for essays that were written in Right Score at various score points. And so I gave you the strip so you would know what the score is and the actual student's words. That's an activity I would have my students do a lot in a classroom with writing, is look at work and go through it and grade it with the rubrics and analyze it and look for these things. So now that's what we're going to take a moment to do. So on your paper you should find, I believe it's a yellow paper that says introductions. And we're going to look at 3 different introductions of sampler papers. One is sufficient, one is adequate, and one is inadequate. Let's go ahead and quickly look here at the prompt, just so you're familiar with what it asked. The students were expected to write an explanatory essay, and maybe we don't see these. We're not really supposed to see these on FSA Day. So here's the released version that we get to look at, so you'll know exactly what they see. Write an explanatory essay to inform fellow citizens about the advantages of limiting car usage. This was the 10th grade prompt. Your essay must be based on ideas and information that can be found in the passage set. Based. What does that imply?
That they've read it.
Okay, certainly that they've read it.
Evidence.
Yes, that they have to use information that can be found in the passage set, right? But with a word like based, can they use information that they didn't find in the passage set? Yeah, and guess what? That's the chocolate-covered strawberry stuff, right? That's how we have more than enough for 4 people to consume in any other country, is when they don't just use information from the text set, but when they also use information from their own brains. So the essay kind of tells them that. It tells them to manage their time carefully, because that's one of the problems that they'll have. It tells them to read the passages, plan their response, write the response, and revise and edit their response. So it gives them the writing process right there on the paper as they see it, and it reminds them, not just once, but in 2 places now, be sure to use evidence from multiple sources and avoid over-relying on one source. So this is where they want them to get the idea that they need to synthesize. They can't just trust one source, and it says it twice in 2 different sentences. Your response should be in the form of a multi-paragraph essay. Write your essay in the space provided. That's the prompt that they get to look at. So let's go ahead now and look at those intros. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and give you I want to show you the way these papers are laid out so that you are very familiar with what we're doing. What I did was I took the rubric language that had something to do with introductions or seemed to have something to do with introductions, because really there's only one word in the rubric for each of these. It says there's a logical progression of ideas from beginning to end with a satisfying introduction and conclusion. That's the remark that that it's graded on. And then you can see how now we have an adequate progression of ideas from beginning to end with a sufficient introduction and conclusion, not satisfying, and then an uneven progression of ideas from beginning to end with an inadequate introduction and conclusion. And so this is one line from the rubric out of the focus, purpose, and organization section. The other thing that I provided here for you is the comments. The people that actually graded these essays, they made comments on what they saw in the paper and what they saw going on. So these are the comments of the graders. And then what I did is I gave you an introduction at 3 different score points, 4 being the best, 3 being what we would consider proficient, not necessarily passing, but proficient, and then the one that would be considered inadequate. I didn't give you ones. It's easy to find ones. They don't have much on the paper. We probably see those a lot, not to mention we don't really want, if you were to put this in front of your students, which by the way I would take this paper, I'd stick it right in front of them and do the activity that we're gonna do together with my students. And I would do this often. I would change intros and conclusions and papers that I had them write myself in my own classroom. And you might not have these, you would be creating these, but you could always have this. And you could always have a discussion about what really makes a great intro. Intros seem to be something that kids have difficulty with, I think, and it's important that we talk about it because it is absolutely required on the FSA that there is an intro. It has to have one. There's no place, maybe in the 1, if you don't have an intro. Now, the other thing I want you to keep in mind with this is grading these papers as a holistic grader is like a balance, or maybe it's better to use a cup. I wish I had an empty cup here. I don't, but if I were to put a cup here, every time students do things that are good, that support whatever it is, there might be a piece of rice that's dropped into the cup, right? And there might be a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and as the graders are finding nothing is ever taken out of the cup. It's an empty cup and things are put into it. So once they pass the score point 2, it's fallen to a 2, even if they missed some things that are in the score point 2. Once it gets to a 3, they are a score point 3, even if they've missed some things that might be in a score point 3. Once we cross that general threshold of it's more a 3 than it is a 2, they get the score of 3. Same thing with a 4. And you're going to notice when you look at the rubric, there's a lot of things on the list. You're also going to notice when we look at some essays, which I'm sure you've seen before, you'll say, it doesn't even have this. How could it be a score point 2? It says right here on the rubric it has to have it. Well, because it has to have a lot of things to get the score point 2 or to get the score point 3. And it has most of them, not all of them. So you're going to see errors, and that's okay. And kids are going to make errors, but you as a teacher have to get familiar with the errors your students are personally making and help them make progress in ways that will get more rice in the cup. And that's another illustration I might use with my kids. Maybe not rice, it's kind of small, maybe beans, dried beans. And literally as they grade papers, you could give them all little clear cups and say, put a bean in every time you see something that was really good, that met one of our checklists. And put the little and say, did you do it? Did you get to the 2? You got to the 2, high five. You know, you got to the 3. And they might have fun with that. It could be an interactive activity that could help with peer reviewing, right? Which is that scale 4 ultimately. You have them practicing, evaluating other people's work. So that's even more cognitively complex than writing their own. So that's always a good activity. I always like to bring in, anytime I can, ways that kids can touch things to understand them. So the idea of the cups and the beans does 2 major things. One, it keeps us from throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. This had a quote in the introduction, and you can't do that. It can't be a passing essay. Well, yeah, because if it has, it could be, if it has plenty of the right stuff in it. And we can literally quantify the right stuff as we go through the paper. We can quantify each sentence. And is there enough? We can quantify each transition, and we can put beans in to eventually visually see and tactily understand quality and the kind of the scale idea. So go ahead and take a minute now. I want you to read the 3 intros with your partners or alone, however you like to do it, and see if you can see why it got the score that it did. See if you can see inadequate, sufficient, and satisfying, and logical progression of ideas. That's the uneven, adequate, and logical. So look for those things. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do that while I walk around, listen to you, chat with you, and then we'll talk about it. We look at these rubrics that we're given as teachers, and they literally, the changes are adequate to sufficient, to satisfying, to inadequate, and that's all you'll get in a rubric. So that was one of the big things that I felt I needed to crack open for teachers and students. And even for myself, I knew that that nut needed to be cracked, because when I was a teacher in the classroom, I would look at these papers and I'd go, how are they different? And so it took a lot of analysis work in the classroom, looking at papers side by side and asking, how are they alike? How are they different? If this one got a better score on transitions, what is it exactly that it's doing differently than this one? So I would literally analyze papers, and I taught AP Lang and Comp, and they, like these FSA sampler papers, will give you every score point. So students can earn between a 1 and a 9. And so you can literally look at the same essay written by many different students on the same topic and see each score point difference. And then they'll give you, again, the scores comments, which are sometimes helpful, but I would literally say, let me look at this body paragraph and this body paragraph and see if it's the way the transitions are, so I could find out a formula or at least the elements of a good paper. And then going back to the idea that you're looking at what makes something satisfying, what makes something only adequate, and trying to verbalize that. If you just have a conversation with teachers about those words, they don't know. We don't know. It's hard to articulate, but when I show them breakfast, I found that showing them breakfast allowed them to identify all the essential elements to a great paper in breakfast, and then translate that thinking or be able to use that as a metaphor for what we see in papers. And they don't even have to change the language. There's enough. The basics are in there. You know, there's something special about it. And then they can apply those to the different elements of the rubric and see the difference between satisfying and adequate and sufficient.